Night Video.
As he wiped down the tables, the silence pressed. The night had been relatively uneventful. John was used to working late, and though the restaurant's dim lighting always made him uneasy, he had learnt to dismiss the strange noises and shadows. It was closing time, and the last guests had left nearly an hour ago. The rest of the staff had gone home, leaving John to finish up the final tasks and lock up. As he wiped down the tables, the silence pressed in. The only sound was the soft hum of the overhead lights, but even that seemed faint, as if the air itself had thickened with an unseen presence. He hurried through his tasks, eager to leave the eerie stillness behind. Then, without warning, the lights flickered and died, plunging the entire restaurant into absolute darkness. John froze, the cleaning cloth still in his hand. His heart raced, and his first instinct was to dismiss it as a power outage. He fumbled for his phone in his apron pocket, hands trembling slightly as he switched on the flashlight. The thin beam of light illuminated a small circle in front of him, casting long shadows on the nearby tables and walls. The sense of isolation hit him like a wave. He was alone in the restaurant, completely alone, or at least he hoped he was. The thought of being watched crept into his mind like a poisonous whisper, and suddenly the shadows seemed to move in the corner of his vision. "No big deal," John muttered to himself, his voice barely more than a whisper in the oppressive quiet. "Just a blackout. I'll check the fuse box and be out of here." He started towards the exit, his footsteps sounding unnaturally loud in the silent restaurant. As he passed the bar, the wooden floorboards creaked under his feet, and the faint clinking of glassware echoed from the shelves. He reached for the door handle, eager to step out into the cold night air and leave the suffocating darkness behind. But then he heard it. Footsteps, soft, slow, deliberate. At first, he thought he had imagined it. He stopped moving, holding his breath, listening intently. The footsteps came again, louder this time, shuffling against the wooden floor. They were behind him, coming closer. John's heart pounded in his chest as he spun around, the flashlight sweeping across the room. Nothing. The restaurant was empty, just as it had been a moment ago. But the footsteps didn't stop. They grew louder, quicker, as if someone, or something, was running towards him, unseen in the dark. "Hello?" John called out, his voice shaky and uncertain. "Is someone there?" The only response was the sound of footsteps, now directly behind him. His skin prickled as he felt an icy presence at his back, followed by the faintest whisper, a cold breath that sent shivers down his spine. "John?" The voice was barely audible, but it was unmistakable. Someone or something had whispered his name. Panic surged through him. Without thinking, John bolted towards the kitchen. The beam from his phone shook as he ran, casting wild shadows on the walls. His footsteps echoed in the empty space, but he couldn't hear his own breath over the pounding in his ears. All he could think about was escaping, getting out of the restaurant as quickly as possible. As he reached the kitchen door, he glanced back for just a second, his phone's light illuminating the empty dining area. But then, from the corner of his eye, he saw movement, a dark shape, like a figure standing in the far corner, watching him. He didn't dare to look closer. He turned and pushed through the kitchen door, slamming it shut behind him. The kitchen was just as dark and eerie, but the faint green glow of emergency lights cast unsettling shadows across the stainless steel countertops. John took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He fumbled for his phone, dialing the restaurant's manager, but there was no signal. His hands trembled as he glanced around, unsure of what to do next. Just then, the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. A creaking sound echoed through the kitchen, the unmistakable groan of old wooden hinges. Slowly, he turned his head toward the far side of the room. The basement door was open. John stared, frozen in place, as the door continued to creak, moving ever so slightly, as though someone had just passed through it. His heart raced, and he struggled to breathe. The basement? Carlos had warned him never to go down there alone. He'd heard the stories, the whispers among the staff, but he never truly believed them. Until now, the air in the kitchen grew colder, a bitter chill that seemed to seep into his bones. His mind raced with thoughts of what could be lurking in the dark beneath the restaurant. But one thing was certain. Whatever it was calling for him, and it wanted him to follow. John's legs felt heavy, as though something unseen was pulling him towards the basement door. He took a step back, shaking his head. "No," he whispered to himself, backing away from the door. "This isn't real." But deep down he knew this was real, and there was no escaping it. As the door creaked open wider, a soft whisper drifted from the darkness below. "John, come closer." It was nearing midnight, and the restaurant was minutes away from closing. The usual buzz of clinking glasses and quiet chatter had long died down, leaving only the faint hum of the kitchen staff finishing up their last tasks. John wiped down the last few tables, eager to clock out and head home. The night had been uneventful, as it often was on weekdays, and he was already thinking about the leftover pizza in his fridge waiting for him. Just as he was about to lock the front door, the bell above it chimed softly. John looked up, startled, and saw a woman walk in. She moved gracefully, her movements slow and deliberate, like someone who wasn't in any rush. Her attire immediately caught his eye, an old-fashioned, deep burgundy dress, the kind of thing you'd see in a period film. The long, flowing fabric brushed the floor as she made her way to the corner table, her face obscured by the dim lighting, and her hat, which cast a shadow over her features. "Sorry, miss," John called out, slightly unnerved by the lateness of her visit. "We're just about to close." The woman didn't respond, but merely sat down at the far corner table, folding her hands neatly in her lap. She looked out of place, like someone who had stepped out of another time. Her presence was unsettling, yet there was something oddly calm about her. John hesitated for a moment before approaching. "Can I get you anything?" he asked, though a part of him was hoping she'd decline and leave. Without lifting her head, the woman quietly said, "A glass of wine, please." Her voice was soft, but there was a strange coldness to it that sent a chill down John's spine. He nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He hurried to the bar, quickly pouring a glass of red wine. When he returned to her table, she was sitting perfectly still, her hands resting gently on the table, her gaze fixed on nothing in particular. "Here you go," John said, setting the glass down in front of her. The woman didn't acknowledge him or the wine. She just sat there, staring ahead, as if lost in thought. Feeling increasingly uneasy, John stepped back, deciding to give her some space. As he walked back towards the kitchen, he kept glancing over his shoulder at her. Something about her was unsettling, like she didn't quite belong there. He stepped behind the bar for a moment, and when he turned back around, she was gone. John blinked in disbelief. The chair she had been sitting in was now empty. His eyes darted around the restaurant, but the woman was nowhere to be seen. There hadn't been a sound. No door opening, no footsteps. She had vanished, just like that. But the glass of wine remained, untouched, sitting on the table as if she had never been there at all. A cold shiver ran down his spine. He walked back to the table, staring at the glass. The wine surface was perfectly still, undisturbed, as though the glass had never been lifted. John picked it up, his hand trembling slightly, and brought it back to the bar. Something was very, very wrong. Unable to shake the growing sense of dread, he approached his coworker, Sarah, who was counting the register at the end of the night. "Hey, Sarah," John said, his voice low. "Did you see that woman who just came in?" Sarah looked up, frowning. "What woman?" "The one in the old-fashioned dress. She came in a minute ago, sat at the corner table, ordered wine. She just disappeared." At the mention of the woman, Sarah's face turned pale, her hands freezing over the cash register. She looked like she had seen a ghost. Literally. "You saw her?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," John replied, unease creeping into his words. "Who was she?" Sarah closed the register with a snap and glanced around nervously. "John, that woman's been seen here for years, but she's not real." "What do you mean, she's not real?" John asked, his heart skipping a beat. "I mean, she's a ghost," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Staff members have seen her over the years. She shows up in that same old-fashioned dress, sits in the same corner table, orders something, and then vanishes. No one knows who she is, but some say she was a woman who died under mysterious circumstances decades ago. They say she was a regular here, back when this place was a speakeasy. Some even say she was murdered." John felt the blood drain from his face. He glanced back at the empty corner table where the woman had been sitting just minutes before. The air felt heavier, colder now, as if the temperature had dropped. "Are you serious?" John asked, hoping this was some kind of sick joke. "I wish I wasn't," Sarah replied. She only appears late at night, just before closing. That's why we all hate staying late, because she always comes back. John's heart raced as the pieces began to fall into place. The woman, the dress, the way she vanished without a sound. It wasn't just his imagination. She was real. At least she had been, once. And now her spirit still lingered in the restaurant, trapped in some sort of haunting loop. As the weight of what had just happened settled over him, John felt a cold gust of air brush past him, making the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He wasn't sure what scared him more, the fact that he had just seen a ghost, or the realization that she might not be the last one to appear.